The cold winds blew harsh across the stone walls of Winterfell as the king's banners approached. Ned Stark stood silently in the courtyard, watching Robert Baratheon ride through the gates. Years had passed since they last stood side by side, but this time was different. There was no joy in Ned's eyes, no warmth, only calculation, only memory. Robert dismounted with his usual bravado, arms wide open, grinning like the old days. "Gods, Ned, you haven't changed a bit," he roared, but Ned had changed, deeply, quietly, and forever. They walked through the halls of Winterfell, sharing ale and tales, as was expected. But in Ned's mind, pieces were already falling into place. Lyanna's face haunted him still, not just her death, but the lies, the silence, and the betrayal that came after. The South had taken everything, and now the South had come knocking again, wearing a crown. When Robert asked him to be Hand of the King, it wasn't a shock. It was a move Ned had expected. And this time he wouldn't say no, but not for duty, for something deeper. That night, in the quiet of his chambers, Ned unrolled old letters, ones he had kept hidden even from Catelyn. Names scratched in ink: Lannister, Baelish, Pycelle. Men who had twisted the realm for their own gain. Men who had watched his sister die and called it peace. He looked at the Stark direwolf banner hanging above the hearth. Then he looked at the royal stag, Robert's symbol. For years he had tried to live in peace, to stay away from the game. But peace had cost him everything. It had cost his sister. It had nearly cost his children. No more. He would go south, but not as a servant of the crown. He would go as a Stark of the North, with a silent sword and a patient mind. He would use Robert's anger, his throne, and his enemy's pride to tear down every name on that list. The next morning, Ned accepted the offer. On the journey to King's Landing, he began planting the first seeds. He flattered Robert's ego, reminded him of the days when the Lannisters were only a name he distrusted. He spoke carefully around Cersei, watching her eyes like a hawk. He took note of who spoke too much, who stayed too quiet, who watched him too long. Everything was a move, every word a step in the game. Littlefinger met them at the gate of the capital. The smirk on his face hadn't changed, but neither had Ned's memory. Peter Baelish had once put a blade to his brother's honor. He had whispered poison into Lysa's ears. He was no friend, but for now, Ned smiled back. Wolves don't bare teeth until it's time to kill. Within weeks, Ned took his seat as Hand. He made no loud moves, no sudden changes. But behind closed doors, he began to build his own web. Varys became a quiet ally. The Spider appreciated someone who listened more than he spoke. The City Watch commander was replaced with a man from the north, loyal to the Stark name. Maester. Pycelle found his messages intercepted, and Peter Baelish, too busy thinking Ned was another honorable fool, had no idea the Northman was keeping record of every lie he spoke. Then came the tourney, the spectacle the Lannisters loved. And it was there that Ned made his first real strike. Gregor Clegane, the Mountain, brutally killed a young knight from Dorne, in public, in broad daylight, and this time Ned pushed for justice. He used Robert's wrath, reminded him that Gregor had served the Mad King, that the man was loyal to Tywin, not the crown. That justice demanded punishment. Robert, drunk and angry, gave in. Gregor was ordered to face trial by combat, an insult to Tywin Lannister, and a fracture in the alliance the king didn't even realize was cracking. Whispers began to spread. The North was rising, the king was turning, and the Lannisters were being isolated. Ned didn't smile. He waited. The game had only just begun. Tensions in King's Landing grew like weeds after a storm. The order against Sir Gregor Clegane sent shockwaves through the court. Tywin Lannister, who never forgot an insult, withdrew quietly to Casterly. Rock, but silence from a lion was never safety. It was a growl in the dark. Ned Stark, though, remained unmoved. He had done what Robert couldn't, thrown the first stone at the Lannisters. Now he watched who flinched, who panicked, who whispered in corners. Littlefinger, ever the shadow dancer, approached him days later. "A bold move, Lord Stark," he said with that smug grin. "You may not survive too many of those." Ned only looked at him. "Then I'll make sure they count." Petter laughed, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of caution. For the first time he was unsure. If Ned was still the same man he remembered, that doubt was valuable. It meant Ned had begun to change the board. Meanwhile, Robert drank more. The crown weighed heavier, and Ned used that too. In their private talks, he reminded the king of debts, the way the Lannisters held his gold, controlled his court, and whispered around his throne. He reminded Robert of Rhaegar, of Lyanna, of how power had been stolen by cowards in fine clothes. Robert's anger lit up like wildfire. Cersei noticed. She saw her grip slipping, but she misread it. She thought Robert's anger was wild, undirected, not knowing it was Ned feeding it like oil on flame. Then the next piece came into play, Jon Arryn's death. Ned quietly reopened the old man's investigations, pretending it was grief, curiosity, loyalty. But really he wanted the truth, and more importantly, who had buried it. He met with Grand Maester Pycelle under pretense of asking about Jon's final days. Pycelle, arrogant and slow, offered honeyed lies. Jon was sick, he said. Old, weak. It was natural. But Ned watched his eyes. The man was hiding something. He went to Sir Barristan Selmy next. The old knight still believed in truth and duty. Ned respected that. From him, he learned that Jon had been visiting a blacksmith's apprentice, a boy with Baratheon blood in his veins. Not officially, but plain as the hammer he carried. Bastard! Ned said nothing, but his mind sharpened. Jon had found something. A secret of blood, and someone had silenced him. He knew where to look next. Ned visited Gendry in the shadows of the smithy. The boy's features, black hair, blue eyes, broad shoulders, mirrored Robert as he once was. No one had to say it. The truth was in his face. He left Gendry safe for now, but the question in Ned's mind burned hotter. Why had Jon died for a boy who shouldn't matter? He returned to the Red Keep and began comparing Baratheon children, Joffrey, Tommen, Myrcella. None bore Robert's strength, none his colouring. They were Lannisters, all of them. He didn't react. He didn't scream or storm into Robert's chambers. No, that would be the Ned Stark of old, too noble, too quick. This Ned was colder, sharper. He began writing letters, one to Stannis, one to Renly, each hinting at truths, debts and claims. And then one to Tywin, and not a threat but a whisper. The truth is a sword, Lord Tywin, and swords are meant to cut. He gave the letter to Varys. The spider's eyes lit up as he read it, but he said nothing, only nodded. Even Varys wasn't sure what Ned was planning anymore. Robert, meanwhile, planned a hunt, a grand distraction. He wanted to drink, to kill something, to forget the weight on his shoulders, and Ned let him go. But just before the king left, Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "When you return, Your Grace," he said softly, "we'll speak of truth." "The kind no man can ignore," Robert nodded, half drunk. "Aye, Ned, when I return." But Ned wasn't counting on his return. He was already preparing for what came after. The king was gone, galloping into the woods for his hunt, laughing, shouting, already half drunk before the first boar crossed his path. And behind him, the city was no longer ruled by a man in a crown. It was now quietly under the watch of a man in silence. Ned Stark stood at the window of the Tower of the Hand, looking down at the Red Keep's walls. Cersei Lannister was still here, so were her children, and the lies wrapped around their names like golden cloaks. He didn't need Robert's death, not yet. But he needed to make sure that when the crown eventually fell, it would land far from Cersei's reach. He met with Renly Baratheon in the gardens that night, the younger brother still laughing, still playing at courtly games. But Ned's words were sharp. "Your brother has no true-born heir," he said plainly. Renly laughed. "That's treason." "It's truth," Ned replied, "and the truth will rule this kingdom, whether men like it or not." Renly's smile faded. "You mean to put Stannis on the throne?" "I mean to put a rightful Baratheon on the throne. Stannis is the elder. He has the claim." Renly crossed his arms. "Stannis has no allies." "Then we make them." But even as he said, Ned knew Stannis wouldn't bend to whispers. He was fire and stone, stubborn, unyielding. If Ned aligned with him, there would be no turning back. That same night Varys came to him with whispers of Robert's injuries. A boar, a spear, too much wine, too little caution. "He's not dead yet," the eunuch said quietly. "But he will be soon." Ned said nothing for a long time. The room felt colder. The moment he'd been preparing for was here. Too soon, perhaps, but it was now. He went to the king's bedside. Robert lay pale, sweating, half delirious. The wound was deep. The maesters were doing their best, but even Pycelle's face betrayed the truth. The king was dying. Robert looked at Ned with tired eyes. "I was never meant to be king, was I?" "You were meant to win the war," Ned said softly. "And you did." Robert chuckled bitterly, then winced in pain. "I should have married Lyanna." Ned said nothing. What was the point? That dream had died long ago, replaced with blood and ruin. "Write my will," Robert muttered. "You'll rule in my place until Joffrey comes of age." Ned dipped the quill in ink, but he didn't write Joffrey. He wrote, "My rightful heir." He let Robert seal it, unaware. And when it was done, he tucked the paper away, and not in the hands of the Queen, but with his own guards. The moment Robert died, the Red Keep turned cold and dangerous. Cersei moved quickly, too quickly. She ordered the King's Guard to seize the throne room. She placed Joffrey on the Iron Throne, dressed in black, pretending to mourn. Varys vanished into the shadows. Littlefinger watched from a distance, amused, as if the whole thing were a game. But Ned Stark was not playing. He summoned the City Watch. His men, ones he had planted carefully over weeks. With their help, he marched into the throne room. Joffrey sat there like a boy, pretending to be a man, his sword resting at his side. "You are not the king," Ned said, holding up the sealed letter. Cersei stepped forward, venom in her eyes. "He is Robert's son. That's enough." "No," Ned said flatly. "He is not Robert's son, and you know it." The silence was sharp as steel. The court held its breath. Cersei took a step closer, face cold and composed. "Then you had better make sure you win, Lord Stark, because if you come at the crown and miss, there is no forgiveness, only blood." Ned's eyes didn't flinch. "I don't miss." With a gesture, his men moved forward, surrounding the boy king. The King's Guard hesitated, half of them loyal to the Lannisters, but half uncertain. It could have turned into slaughter, but then the doors opened, and Renly Baratheon stepped in, flanked by men of the Reach. House Tyrell, unexpected, silent, powerful. Renly's voice echoed across the hall. "By blood and law, the throne belongs to House Baratheon, and until it's settled, the Lion keeps no crown." Ned had allies now. Not just swords, but legitimacy. The game was no longer quiet. It had begun in full. Cersei Lannister stood at the balcony of Maegor's Holdfast, her hands clenched so tightly the skin had gone pale. Below her the Iron Throne stood surrounded by men who didn't belong to her. Northerners, Reachmen, strangers. Joffrey was gone from it, dragged like a misbehaving child from a seat made for kings. She had underestimated Ned Stark. That wouldn't happen again. Back in the Tower of the Hand, Ned knew the war hadn't been avoided, only delayed. He had removed the boy king, yes, but the Lannisters would not stay quiet. Tywin Lannister would never accept humiliation. And Cersei, she was not a woman who mourned. She was a mother who plotted. Renly stayed close, full of ambition and charm, thinking himself already halfway to kingship. He smiled too much, moved too fast, spoke of crowning himself before Stannis could react. But Ned didn't trust that. Ambition, Renly was not Robert, and he was no Stannis. Still, for now, he was useful. Varys came again, this time with news like poison wrapped in silk. "Lord Stark," he said softly, "Tywin has raised his banners. 10,000 Lannister men. March toward the Riverlands. Lord Tully's lands are burning." Ned's stomach turned. "Catelyn's family. So it begins," he murmured. Ned met with the small council, what was left of it. Pycelle refused to acknowledge the letter Robert had sealed, calling it convenient and uncertain. Littlefinger, as always, played the middle, suggesting compromise, claiming the throne needed unity, not war. But Ned had already seen their games. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. He simply signed a series of commands. The City Watch was to double guard in the Red Keep. No raven would leave the capital without his seal. Stannis Baratheon was to be summoned formally to claim the throne. That last one struck fear into them. Because if Stannis came, and he came with ships, there would be no stopping what followed. And then came the blow he had expected, but still felt like ice. Jaime Lannister had ambushed Lord Tully's outriders. The Kingslayer had taken river runs, outer defences, and sent a message carved into a corpse. "The lion has claws." Robb Stark received the message in Winterfell, and the boy marched. Ned did not send for him. He had wanted to keep the North out of it. But Robb, his son, was too much of a Stark to sit idle while his mother's kin burned. By the time ravens brought word to King's Landing, Robb was already leading 18,000 Northmen south, grey wind at his side, his bannermen behind him. Rickard, Unkar Stark, Great Jon Umber, Roose Bolton, silent, watching, always calculating. Now it was war. Not just politics, not whispers in the dark, but steel, blood, and banners in the wind. Cersei made her first counter-move that same night. Joffrey vanished, slipped from his room under the protection of 2 gold-cloaked guards. Whispers said they had gone west. Others claimed they were hiding in the Red Keep itself. But Ned knew she was playing for time. She was hiding the peace she couldn't afford to lose. Renly grew more anxious by the day, already talking of wearing a crown, of bypassing both his brothers. "The people love me," he said once. "They'd rather a king with a smile than one with a sword." Ned looked at him and replied, "Smiles don't keep kingdoms. Only fear or respect do. You have neither." And that was the first fracture in their alliance. Meanwhile, ravens brought darker news. Tywin had split his forces. One half went toward Riverrun. The other, under Sir Gregor Clegane, began terrorizing the Riverlands, burning villages, killing peasants, spreading panic. Ned saw the plan. Chaos. The lion wasn't attacking Winterfell or the capital. He was tearing apart the countryside, forcing the realm into war fatigue, making the people hate the rebels, making Ned look like the cause of it all. But Ned had no time for doubt. He needed Stannis, and he needed Robb to hold. So he did something he had never done before. He sent assassins, not honorable soldiers, not banners, just shadows. Varys arranged it. Ned didn't ask where the knives came from. He only asked that Gregor Clegane not live to see another sunrise. For once, the North would play the game the South had mastered, and somewhere in the dark. Corners of the Red Keep, Arya Stark listened, watched, learned. She had her father's silence, but not his mercy. The dawn over King's Landing broke crimson, as if the gods themselves had bled in the night. Ned Stark sat at the high table of the council chamber, his eyes sunken, his jaw tight. A raven had arrived before sunrise. Gregor Clegane was dead. Not in a glorious battle. Not at the edge of a knight's sword, no. He had died choking in his tent, blood pouring from his mouth, eyes wide with confusion. Some whispered poison, others said it was a curse. Ned didn't offer an explanation. He only nodded once, slowly. Let them guess, let them fear. The message to Tywin was clear. No one is untouchable, not even monsters in your cage. But the old lion didn't roar, not yet. Instead, he pulled back his raiders, tightened his grip on River Run, and called his banners from the Westerlands in full. The Lannisters were not retreating. They were preparing for a war they now knew was real. In Winterfell's shadow, Robb Stark crossed the neck. By now he was no longer just a boy leading his father's men. He was a symbol, the young wolf they were calling him. A Stark marching south to avenge the Riverlands. Ned had heard the title. He didn't hate it, but it filled him with dread. Titles turned sons into legends, and legends didn't live. Long in Westeros, inside the capital, Cersei had gone silent. No threats, no court visits, no public appearances. Her silence was more dangerous than her fury. Varys told Ned she had begun calling in old debts. From the shadows came whispers of sellswords, of debts paid in blood, of the gold cloaks being quietly replaced with men bearing no loyalty to the city, only to gold. Littlefinger, meanwhile, had vanished entirely. He'd left behind a letter addressed to Ned. You've begun playing, Stark. Just remember, the pieces don't always move the way you want, and the board cuts both ways. Ned burned the note. Then came the second raven, and this one struck deeper. Catelyn had taken Tyrion Lannister prisoner. She had seized him on the road to the Vale, believing him responsible for Bran's fall. The move, bold and reckless, had triggered another storm Ned could no longer control. He didn't hate her for it, but it changed everything. Tywin used it as justification to raise his banners fully. No more excuses, no more whispers. The Lannisters would march, not just on River Run, but toward Robb, and Ned knew it was coming. A great battle, one that could break the north or drown the south in snow. In the Red Keep, Ned began tightening security. Every gate had northern guards. Every letter was sealed and examined. Arya and Sansa were kept closer than ever. Even Maester Luwin, brought down from Winterfell, began managing messages personally, yet danger still crept in. One night, Arya found a man in black scaling the walls outside her window. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She followed, silent as shadow, fast as a cat, and when she caught him near the stables, she didn't ask questions. She took his knife and drove it through his back. The guards found her soaked in blood, breathing hard, wide-eyed, but alive. Ned knelt beside her, his hands shaking not with fear but with something worse, understanding. "You're not a little girl anymore," he whispered. "I haven't been since Bran fell," she replied. Voice steady, he didn't send her to a scepter. He didn't scold her. He looked her in the eyes and said, "Next time, don't leave him alive long enough to turn." And she smiled. The war had changed them all. The third raven came from Stannis. The Baratheon sigil was sealed in thick wax, hard and angry. The letter was cold, precise. Stannis acknowledged the truth about Joffrey, declared himself king, demanded fealty, but there was no mention of joining forces, no offer of alliance, only command. Renly scoffed. "Stannis thinks declaring himself king makes him one. He forgets. Men follow a crown, not a lecture." And now Ned faced his greatest threat yet. The Baratheon brothers both claiming the throne and neither trusting the other. He needed unity. But the realm was tearing in four directions: Stannis, Renly, Robb, and the Lannisters. And he stood in the center of it all, the only man who still believed truth could hold the line. But even Ned Stark had begun to doubt, because the truth had killed Jon Arryn. The truth had nearly killed Robert. And soon the truth might burn down. The entire realm. The bells tolled in King's Landing, not for a wedding, not for a death, but for war. Ned Stark stood in the council chamber, the last rays of sunlight slashing through the stained glass windows. A map of Westeros lay open before him, cluttered with tokens. The direwolf, the lion, the stag. They were moving, all of them, faster than he'd hoped, slower than he feared, and now it was time to choose not just who would win, but who would survive. The Raven from Robb had arrived with grave news. Jaime Lannister had attacked from the west. Roose Bolton had repelled him at the Green Fork, but barely. River Run held for now, but its walls wouldn't withstand Tywin's next move. Catelyn was trapped inside. Her father, Lord Hoster, was dying, and Robb, still untested, was being dragged deeper into the storm. Ned's jaw clenched. If the North broke, the game was over, so he made his final move. He called Renly Baratheon to his chambers and spoke plainly. "You're not fit to be king." Renly's expression froze. "You're young, charismatic, but the realm doesn't need charm. It needs order, it needs bloodright, it needs Stannis." Renly scoffed. "He has no love, no alliances, no chance." Ned stepped forward, voice low. "Then give him one. Marry Margaery Tyrell, bind the Reach to your brother, bring peace." But Renly didn't agree. He left that night, rode out of the capital with Loras Tyrell and his sworn swords, declaring himself king before sunrise. Just another man with a crown and no kingdom. And so, another path to peace was shattered. Ned turned to his final option, the only one he had left. A letter was sent to Stannis, carried by a trusted northern knight. It bore only one line: "Ride now, or die with honor later." 3 days later, news reached the capital. Stannis Baratheon had left Dragonstone. A fleet of ships, black sails and burning hearts, was crossing the narrow sea to Storm's End, and then on to King's Landing. The Lannisters panicked. Joffrey was still missing, hidden, some whispered, in the rock itself. Cersei, no longer trying to hide her venom, poisoned the small council with fear. She had Pycelle arrested for incompetence. She had gold cloaks murdered in alleys. And she offered a bounty of 10,000 dragons for the head of Arya Stark, blaming her for the assassins in the court. Ned sent Arya north that night. No formal goodbye, no tears, just a whispered promise in the dark. Survive. Become who you were meant to be. He gave her the blade she had taken from the last assassin, cleaned now, balanced, deadly. Arya didn't cry either. When she left, it was as a wolf, small, quiet, and watching. And then came the final storm. Stannis landed in the Stormlands. His banners swept east. Lords abandoned Renly. Men who once laughed at his coldness now clung to his discipline. The realm was choosing, and fear was louder than gold. Then at the gates of King's Landing, Tywin Lannister made his move. With Renly gone, with Stannis still miles away, he marched straight for the capital. Not in defense, but for conquest. To take the throne, to seize the power Cersei had lost, but Ned had prepared. As Tywin's vanguard reached the King's Road, they found the path burned, stores poisoned, rivers blocked. The North had been there, and vanished. Robb Stark, using the terrain, had outmaneuvered him, and then came the wolves. At the Whispering Wood, Robb trapped Jaime again, this time not for capture, but for vengeance. They found the Kingslayer bloodied and on his knees, the young wolf's sword at his throat. Ned received the raven that night. He read the words slowly. "The lion is caged." The boy is not a boy anymore. He closed his eyes. It was done. The capital fell before it burned. Stannis entered with fire in his eyes, but found the city already turning. Gold cloaks dropped their weapons. Lords surrendered. Even the Red Keep fell with barely a cry. Cersei was gone, poisoned her own wine. Her body was never found. And Joffrey? Some say he died in the west. Some say he became a butcher's boy in the far riverlands. Ned never looked for him. He sat beside Stannis at the throne, handed over the sealed letter Robert had signed, his rightful heir named. And then, slowly, Ned Stark stood up, handed Stannis the Hand's badge, and walked away. He didn't return to Winterfell. Not yet. He rode to River Run, to his wife, to his son, to bury the sword he had used, not in flesh, but in silence, because the war was won, but the game would never end.